middle. Um, so my name is Pete Brown. I work for Microsoft as a developer evangelist up in Redmond, actually working outside of my house in the East Coast. And I'm here today to talk to you about building quality Windows apps. So specifically, we're talking about Windows Store apps and some simple things that you can do to make them higher quality, make them more likely to be promoted in the store, make them more likely to be adopted by users, etc. So how many of you are building Windows 8 apps today? Okay. How many of you have an app in the store right now? How many of you are like making millions of dollars off that right this second? This dude in the front. All right, that's excellent. No, you raised your hand, so I'm going to quote you on it. How many of you want to make your apps better? Right? And then how many of you would consider yourself to have like design skills, visual design skills? Yeah, all right. And for the people who raise your hand, how many of you would say that other people would consider that you have visual design skills? It's like, yeah. So we're going to talk about a bunch of little things. I think, we're on the last day of the conference here. This isn't going to be a super intense talk, but I'm really hoping that this gives you some food for thought, for some things to take back with you when you go to build your apps, whether they be for inside the enterprise or, for your own enrichment. So why do we care about quality? We put stuff in the store. We don't gate on quality for apps to get in the store. We have minimum criteria that are all described in the certification requirements, but we don't necessarily gate on the quality of the app. However, we are very interested in seeing high-quality apps in the store because, one, they make the store better. Who wants to go into a store and see a bunch of crap, right? It's sort of, when you go into the Windows store, you don't want it to look like the dollar store when you walk in, right? You want it to look like, there's lots of really good, high-quality, very interesting apps that you're interested in using. So we want like really high-quality apps in there. At the same time, the more high-quality apps that are in the store, the better that all of the apps will do, because it raises that level. It raises the floor for the apps that are in there, and it makes it more likely that a user is going to, or a customer is going to go to the store, in a physical store, pick up a Windows 8 device and say, wow, look at all these really great apps. I want this device. I want this operating system. Quality apps are also good for your reputation, right? I would assume a lot of you folks are interested in doing well in your career. How many of you contribute to open source projects? Not a one. All right. How many of you contribute to other projects outside your work? Stuff that you might include on your resume or your CV? Yeah, so probably not that porn site. That's probably not what you're going to put in your resume, right? These types of things, like having an app in the store, having an app in there with your name on it, that's good. That's, maybe even if you're not making $1 million off that app, but having it out there and having it recognized as a quality app is something you can put on your resume. Right? I actually saw a job ad via LinkedIn. How many of you get spam on LinkedIn all the time? Yeah, okay. So I saw one, and one of the requirements for that is you must have an app in an app store somewhere. I've never seen that before. And I just thought that was great. So, what a great way to figure out if somebody can take an idea from concept all the way to execution, to getting into the store, to working on the marketing piece of it, to polishing it and everything. What a great way to test that, to have them have an app in the store already. Now, of course, continuing to contribute to open source projects and stuff, I think, is also important. For all you folks that didn't raise your hands, it's something to look into because it gives you experience that's outside your day-to-day job, that, working with other people who might think differently about different problems. So what is a quality app? So a quality app is useful, right? I've seen some apps that are, they eventually get into the store and they're very, very simplistic. Maybe it's just a calculator app or something. Not particularly useful to me, maybe useful to somebody else. So useful is one of those things that's more subjective. But a quality app needs to be useful to somebody, and preferably useful to lots of somebodies. A quality app should be beautiful. And I know this is one place where it's really hard for those of us who are developers who have friends who probably don't think that we can create beautiful apps. Being able to create a beautiful app, though, doesn't mean that you have to spend all your days in Photoshop and Illustrator, and doesn't mean that you necessarily have that mindset of being a visual designer. It just means you can do even simple things like, find color palettes that are appropriate for the brand that you're trying to convey, whether or not they're just pre-canned color palettes from online sites that specialize in that, or at least being able to tell, which colors might go together on the screen and which shapes might go together on the screen. How many of you are married? How many of you let your wife or husband pick your clothes? Yeah, so for those of you, you might actually want to have your wife or your husband or whoever that is be the person who helps you with matching the colors and picking the stuff on the UI. But whether or not it's that person, or whether or not you have a visual designer friend or somebody else that you work with, I know a lot of people who have teenage kids who are super creative, and they let them do that kind of stuff. And what a great way to get your kids involved in something like this is have them help you design some of the UI and pick some of the look and feel. But involve somebody else in helping you with that UI. As we evolve the store and as we evolve Windows apps, you're going to see more and more templates that'll help you with that. But at the same time, you just want to have a kind of a look to that. It's a little bit more of a little bit more effort for you than just creating a Battleship Gray app. It's more like people who are doing web apps these days, where everybody has had to have a little bit of a designer in them in order to build quality websites and quality web apps, even if you're working on existing templates. I think another thing that's really important for quality apps is that it's high performance. Any of you pick up a Surface while you were here? Yeah? Okay. I mean, what a deal, right? For those of you who picked up a Surface, that's an ARM, assuming that you picked up the RT as one of them, that's an ARM-based device. If you've ever looked inside that, the motherboard inside the Surface, I've seen a teardown on it, is like this big, right? It's tiny. It's absolutely tiny. ARM devices are super efficient. They're very small. They're very low power. But at the same time, that means if you want to target those and be able to target those devices that have long battery life and low weight, your app needs to perform really well. So I don't know about you guys. My development machine at my house is a 6-core water-cooled overclocked machine, right? That's what I develop on day to day. It's in my cave. I have two 30-inch screens that give me this wonderful tan. And that's where I spend all my time. That thing will eat an ARM device just for breakfast. I mean, it's multiple cores being able to do all this. So when I'm building these apps, I can make pretty much anything perform well on that. It doesn't matter. But when I go and put it on, say, like a low-power Atom device, like a netbook or something, or I go and put it on something like a Surface or one of the other Windows RT devices, that's where you figure out in your app, like, where you're doing things that might hurt performance. So apps need to perform really well. And more importantly, you need to test on these devices that are lower power. Okay? A great experience. So a quality app has a great experience. It has to be something that a user is going to go to and say, wow, I really like this app. This app is part of my daily or weekly usage pattern. It's something that I want to go back to again and again. And for the same reason, it's also a joy to use. So that's kind of an introduction to things here. What we're going to cover through the rest of this is just some ideas on creating these useful and durable apps. And I'll describe what I mean by durable here in a little bit, as well as doing simple things like moving beyond 2 rows of boxes in the display, right? If you do File New Project in Visual Studio and then publish it at that point, it's probably not going to be the great experience. I want to talk to you and show you some examples of apps that have really interesting UIs that are just a little bit different from the 2 rows of boxes. And then I'm also going to show you some ways to embrace the platform. So especially for folks who haven't built Windows Store apps yet, you may not be aware of some of the standards around how you should use app bars. Like not just the technical way of here's an app bar, here's a technical approach to putting it in your app, but more like how it should be used, like how it should be involved in navigation, where things go on there. And then also a bit on supporting high DPI displays. So I've been coding professionally for a really long time, and in that amount of time, I think until I got into doing some stuff with WPF and Silverlight a few years ago, up until that point in time, DPI was something that, that weird user in the back corner of the office messed with that made their title bars like 3 times as large as everybody else, right? And none of the apps ever bothered to scale to that. But DPI is really important now because we're seeing more and more devices with small screens that have a lot of pixels. So for those of you in the store who went to the store and got a Surface RT and a Surface with Windows 8 Pro? Can you raise your hand for a second? What I want you to do is I want you to go back, get back to your office, get back to your house, and put them side by side and run them side by side. Hello? My mic's cutting out there, sorry. Put them side by side and take a look at the displays on both. You'll see that the Surface with Windows RT is 1366 by 768, but the Surface with Windows 8 Pro is 1920 by 1080 resolution, right? But when you're looking at the start page and when you're looking at Windows Store apps on there, they're going to look the same size. It's because we're actually handling DPI in a meaningful way now. You know, we're making it so that the dots per inch is really something, it's truly dots per inch. Scaling those apps. This keeps cutting out. Is my battery going, or is it just me? All right, well, I can yell too if I need to. So if you look at those, the dots per inch on those, it's very important to be able to scale to those so that you're not displaying things really tiny just because the user has a lot of pixels on their screen. We're getting larger and larger pixel counts on these smaller and smaller displays. You know, we saw there was one device that somebody was talking about that had something like 3560 by 1900 or something absolutely crazy like that. It's going to be an absolutely gorgeous display, but you need to make sure that you account for those pixels and account for those DPIs when you're building your app. So I'm going to show you like one of the really simple things that we've done to make it so that images scale correctly at those different DPIs. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about testing because testing is important, and because I'm a classical developer, testing till the very end here. So a useful app provides value. It's not just, and how you define value can be sort of very subjective, right? And how you define essential can be very subjective. Is an app like Angry Birds essential? Yes, no. There's no Angry Birds fans in here. It may or may not be, right? So for my son, it's essential. If that platform doesn't have Angry Birds on it, that's not a real platform. He wants to make sure that he can do his Angry Birds Star Wars and stuff on there. But it's something that is useful or a fun diversion or something like that. Like, it doesn't have to be essential in the way that it's an intense business app and, you know, it's life-enabling and life-fulfilling. It can be something that's just fun. It can be something that's an interesting diversion. But it needs to be, have some kind of meaningful content to it, and has to be something that users are going to want to go back to again and again. If it's an app that you're just going to download once, open it once, and then never open it again, then I think that app has failed the test to see whether or not it's essential or whether or not it's useful. You want the user to open it again and again and use it again and again. From my standpoint, sort of like a little greedy standpoint for myself, I want the app to be something that people look at that and say, wow, I want Windows 8 because this app is there. So if you create that app, you can do really, really well. Really, really well. It's an app, let's say that you're a brick and mortar store, right? And your app is something that is above and beyond the rest of it. It's related to your brand. It's not something that you're building just as an individual, but it's something you're building for your corporation. And maybe its revenue model is such that you're not filling it with ads, or you're not having people purchase it, but it's that it drives traffic to your regular store, or it drives traffic to your website properties or something like that. So if you're like a Home Depot or Lowe's or any of those types of places, you want something where people can look at that app and use it, and maybe they do something in there that drives them to come into the store and spend money at that store. So that's another way in which it's useful and maybe essential for the user in a way that's a little less traditional than we might think of a regular app. And then finally, when you're looking to see whether or not the app is useful and whether or not it's of high quality, ask yourself whether or not the app is something that you could have done as a website and had the same level of functionality. So if you can do that app as a website and you're not getting any additional value out of building an app, probably shouldn't build an app. Build a website, right? But if you are able to then leverage the platform and provide additional capabilities inside the app that you couldn't do on the website, maybe it integrates with the user's documents library. Maybe it integrates with the local devices. Maybe it's just the fact that it's highly visible in the Windows Store is sufficient reason to say that this is something that's above and beyond what I would do in the website. Or maybe it enables sharing and it makes it really easy for users to find things in the app and then share them with other users and then very virally handle all this marketing. Those are all things that you can do in an app that you can't necessarily do in a website. But if you're just going to stick, like, say, your blog or something like that into an app, that's probably not super useful. You probably want to stick that and just keep it as a website. So a quality app is also something that's going to respect the user. How many of you work in corporations where, like, the desktop and everything is completely locked down? Yeah. How many of you are responsible for that? Yeah, you guys don't want to raise your hands. Oh, there's one guy. Not very. So I once worked. This was a long time ago, .NET 1.0 days, where I worked at as a consultant at a large insurance company that has some sort of green animal as its logo. And it's one person, thank you very much, I'll be here all day. So this was, around the .NET 1.0 days. And at the time, the developer support, like if you wanted online developer support for something, Google News Groups, which was formerly Deja News, was the place to go. It was what everybody used. It was the CompuServe of that time period. But they blocked it because it was chat. They said, nope, you can't do this, it's chat. And so what would happen is the developers would scratch their heads all day, spend 8 hours sitting in the office, in the cubes, sort of just trying to figure out things. Then they would go home at night, look up the answer, come in the next day, and then implement it, right? So not the most efficient model there. But sometimes necessary in corporations. But on these devices, we're not interested in locked down situations. We're not interested in having you be the controller of the machine. We want the user to be in control of their experience and their machine. In most cases here, and leaving out some of the very locked down scenarios in corporations, and I live near Washington, D.C., so I see lots of government stuff as well. Leaving out those for a second, it's the user's device. They control it. It's the user's profile. They control it. It's their time. It's their time downloading the app. It's their time using the app. It's potentially the user's money, just the bandwidth for the app itself, or whether or not that's the purchase of the app, right? And it's the user's data. So you want to be very respectful of these things. You want to allow the user to control all of that. You want them to be able to decide where they're going to store this data. You don't want to force the data to be stored to different places. You want to let them decide when they're going to share data to different places, typically using something like the share charm, right? You want to put them in control. And if you look, the more and more you look at Windows Store apps, and the more you understand how the charms work and everything works, you realize it's all about putting the user in control of their machine. So what does that mean for you all? For part of that, you want to make sure that you are keeping the user in control and not forcing them down different paths and not forcing them to share data that they haven't agreed to share to. Not hard-coding, say, sharing to a specific social network. Using the built-in mechanisms in the operating system to do that. A quality app is durable. So I've seen a number of different apps that are on all sorts of different platforms that are very seasonal, right? There might be a Christmas card app, or there might be an app related to a specific conference. And those are okay. I mean, they have their place in the store. But a durable app, an app that can exist for a longer period of time and has usefulness for a longer period of time, is considered to be a higher quality app. So for some concrete examples, let's say that there's an app for a conference. And you might think, well, that app is really only useful for the week of that conference. And maybe that is when it will peak, when people are going through and registering and setting their schedules and stuff. But if that same app later on then becomes the repository for for all the content for that conference, like all the videos, maybe the networking with your different peers, maybe it has the ability for you to rate the sessions and have ongoing conversations with the speakers and stuff, then that app becomes more durable because it has a life that's beyond just that 1 week period of time. And the reason why we like durable apps is because apps that are very short-lived, it's hard for them to build up any sort of following, and it's hard for them to be discovered well, for for them to really kind of build up that reputation in the store. So when possible, consider making single apps that have seasonal changes to them, right? Or maybe yearly changes. Let's say if there was a TechEd app out there, you could have a single TechEd app, and it could continue to be used year after year and continue to build the content and keep your registration and everything from year to year. Those are what we look for durable apps, and we're much more likely to promote apps that have those types of features as opposed to ones which are only going to be good for that week. If you're building a greeting card app, which I've seen some, they're kind of interesting, but let it work for more than one season. Maybe you've got the Christmas stuff, and then you have Valentine's and birthdays and all those types of things. And so make it so it's useful year-round. So a quality app is original. I found this photo. It's a rather interesting version of a particular phone here. It's you see, suddenly it's a new version that runs on 3 coin cell batteries, apparently. That's probably not original. I'm thinking that's not the OEM device there. Your app should be original in the store. It should not be a copy of somebody else's app. You know, if you look at an app and you say, hey, that's a really cool app, I'm going to make my version of it. Unless you're doing something significantly different and you're really doing something a lot better, then you shouldn't put that app in the store. Be original. Don't just try to copy everything that other people are doing. You know, when Angry Birds became really popular, suddenly on all the different platforms, there were lots of little fling games, and some of them were okay, and a lot of them were just absolutely terrible. I mean, you don't want to invest the time to build an app that is a copy of an inferior copy of something else, because people are going to compare it to that original, and you're not going to do as well as you would if it were an original app. And also, you could get yourself in legal trouble. I mean, if you create a copy of an app out there that's that's clearly a copy of another one, they could sue you and do all sorts of fun things like that. A quality app is beautiful and branded. How many of you are aware of the brands that you work for, like the colors and the typefaces and things like that? Yeah, everybody's like, kinda. Yeah, all right. Any company and lots of individuals have a brand associated with them. Some of them are much stronger than others. This app here happens to be a Disney one. Clearly, Disney has a very strong brand, and they have many very strong sub-brands related to different things. In this case, it's fairies, right? Taking that brand and bringing it through the rest of the app is one of the best things that you can do for making an app beautiful and original and something that people will strongly associate with your brand. So in this case, rather than have just the simple, Disney Fairies logo or Disney Fairies text in a particular typeface up on the top left-hand corner, they actually have the logo Disney Fairies Hidden Treasures there as part of that. That's part of the branding. And if you look, there's a lot more, even more subtle stuff in there. The font that's used in this app is specific to that brand. If your corporation has a particular font that's used as part of your brand, you should use that in your apps. Even the simple the chevron shape that shows you that you can drill down into the pages on this hub here, those are also slightly shaded, and they just fit with the brand. And then there's a little bit of very slight adornment around the different sections. Now, the reason why this works, we don't want you to have lots of adornment and other stuff in apps, but the reason why this works here is because it's all a very strong part of this brand. So who can create beautiful apps here? I gave you a little bit of a hard time about designer stuff earlier just because I've been there. I once thought I could design until I met a real visual designer, and then I realized, no, I can't design. A designer will always be able to improve your app, and I use designer as a generic term here, but I'm talking user experience designers, I'm talking people who are visual designers, graphics designers, etc. If you're in a large corporation, consider using the people that are building your web properties to help you out with that, because they're going to also have a lot of experience already with visual design. They're going to need to transition that over to a Windows 8 style, which might take them a little bit. They might not get it right away, but they're going to be in a good position to be able to do that and to be able to help you out. Another option is to use templates. At Microsoft, we're working on all sorts of different ways to help enable you guys to be able to build things easily based on different templates. And then, of course, like I said, in a business, use your web property designers. Except for this one. You probably don't want to use the designer who did this site. This is the min bar. Anybody do better than this? I think you're in pretty good shape. So finally here, before I get into some code on this, or some examples I should say, don't be boxed in. So lots of the initial apps that went out of the store just were 2 rows of boxes, right? And the reason for that is if you do File New Project in Visual Studio, what do you get? You get a template with a couple of rows of boxes on the screen. And that's okay, but it's not beautiful. It's not the Windows style. It's an example of something you can do, but it is not the end that everybody needs to move towards. You don't need to create a gray app that uses Sego as the font that has squares all the way across it. You do have lots of flexibility there. So here's an example, and I'll show you the website these all come from in just a second here. This is one of the design inspiration samples. You see this particular one here has some interesting graphs, and there are third parties that are making these, like a lot of the control vendors are already creating controls that make it possible to do these types of layouts. You see this one has some interesting graphs. It has, it's still a very simple style. You're not seeing things with gradients and a lot of textures and stuff like that, so it's still appropriate to the Windows design. Here's another one. This one here is the school app. So this is for getting people, around their day-to-day work on a particular school. It has their course information, tests, and everything that are coming up. And this one uses more of a skewed design. So again, it's still very crisp. We still have pretty sharp edges on this. It still definitely fits the Windows style, and it's also very highly branded between the colors and the logos and whatnot on there. But it's something a little bit different than just the straight old couple of rows of boxes. So it's a little interesting to look at. Here's another one. I happen to like slants. We're going to slant one way and then the other way, I guess, here. So this one is a shopping app. And it's got this guy here in his suit, and it's got the way this is arranged. You could have just presented this as a list view with a bunch of items in it with like little thumbnails. But instead, what they decided to do is to have this sort of skewed approach and have just let the pictures speak for themselves as opposed to having a bunch of text along with that. I do not own any suits that cost $550, but that's okay. All right, so let me show you a couple of the other examples here. See if this goes through. Excellent. All right. So if you go to design.windows.com, this is where you're going to find a lot of our visual design guidance. Right? And if you go up here on the top, there is a section on UX patterns, which I would encourage you to look at because the UX patterns section describes all the different ways that you can interact with a Windows app. This is especially important if you do have designers of any sort on staff to have them look at that to understand the interaction patterns for Windows that may be different from interaction patterns they're used to on other platforms. But then there's this other page here called Inspiration. And the Inspiration page has a lot of different examples. Let me zoom this in here for a second. It has a lot of different examples of rather innovative UI, right? Again, things that are not just 2 rows of boxes. And so each of these are described by their particular use cases or their scenarios. So for example, the medical apps by this hospital also has code available, so you can see how they implemented these particular design styles. But it talks about the use of the app, how it looks, how you will interact with this app. So doing the pinch to zoom and the semantic zoom and stuff like that. And very interesting ideas about how it would expect to be used. And then there's a lot of technical information for you all to be able to take this and say, okay, I can do this, but I'm not quite sure how they did this thing with the skew, or I'm not sure how they did this other particular part of that. The code is all available so you can look at that and be able to learn from it. So these aren't necessarily templates where you're going to do file new medical app project, but at the same time, you can start with a blank project and then take ideas from stuff like this. Right? Another place, I'm going to pull this up as cooler. I don't remember the URL, but I'm going to check to see if that's the right one. I think so. If you can't match colors, right? I'm terrible with colors. When I see colors that match, I'm okay for figuring that out. But let's say that you're trying to build an app and you don't have brand colors that you're working with. There are sites such as this one, which is Cooler, Kuler.adobe.com. And what this does is it lets lots of different people upload these color swatches, these lists of colors that they've worked on that they think work well together. You can go through that and find there's thousands of them in there, and you can take one of those and use that in your app and be able to say, all right, this is the color scheme that I want to use for this app. And it's a really great way for you to be able to go in and decide on a color scheme for your app without having to figure out how to manually do that. And of course, if you want to, you can change things around yourself and find colors that go together. Or in my case, I would do that and find colors that look absolutely terrible together. All right. The other thing I want to show you that we're working on, and these haven't been publicly released yet, but they will soon. These are a set of design samples, design inspiration samples, that I've been working on with a bunch of different companies that specialize in user experience. And these are going to be released with the source code and everything, so you'll be able to see these from both the markup as well as the source. Some of these are HTML and JavaScript, like this one. Some of them are XAML and C#. Right? So this is an example of a sports app, and it has an interesting hub design where if you watch, when you scroll over to the left, the background fades out. Right? Go back to the middle. This is the focus of the story. Scroll over to the right, the background fades out again. It also has ways of integrating different bits of content for being able to show, feeds from Twitter and all this other stuff, where the data in here is dummied up because these are user experience or design samples here. However, they give you an idea of how you could implement these types of interactions in your app. And also just some really neat techniques. Like, for example, each of the teams here has a color associated with them. So when you go over to that team's page, you can see that the color is branded and that is pulled over as part of this. And again, the transitions on this, I think, are really great, and it gives you a good idea of how to implement this in your own apps. So another example app, here's a college companion app, again with the slants, right? Because it's a thing to do. This is a C# and XAML app, and the source for this will be released as well, but it gives you an idea of how you can build apps that have a different type of hub design that are not just, again, multiple rows of boxes, although we do have some of that in here. You see, even over in the point here where the images, we're not just doing 2 rows of 3 sets of images. One of them is taller than the other. Here, this mic. Let's try this again. I think the battery's dying in this mic, so if you have a backup, that might be good, because the people on the watching the video might have a hard time. All right. This one gives you a bunch of different ideas for ways that you can build this stuff in the UI, as well as how to implement a navigation pattern. So talk amongst yourselves for a second here. Am I on now? Hey, there we go. All right. Sorry about that, guys. New mic. And if it still breaks again, then obviously my voice must be broken, not the mic here. All right. So this one also shows you how to do things like implement a proper navigation pattern for a hub, right? So it's showing you that each of the items that are in the hub also need to show up in the navigation bar. All right, and then I'll show you another one here. Here is a taxi app. So this one shows you how to do taxi booking. Surprisingly, taxi booking apps are extremely popular worldwide. I never knew it until I started looking at some of these scenarios. But this one also shows you how to do things like implement Bing Maps as part of your app, right? And how to integrate that into the experience. So again, lots of interesting things here where they don't look just like the straight templates, but they should give you some ideas for how to build these apps yourself. And then I have, here, let me show you one last one here for this. This one is a conference app. And you see this one has a slightly different design as well, where the idea behind this app is, again, being able to go through and see your schedule and register and also work with the navigation patterns that we were talking about, et cetera here. And again, I'll make the source code for all of these available very soon. And then there's some other apps in the store. I went to India in March for a while, and I was talking about building quality apps and stuff there for a bit. And this particular app is one that really struck me as very beautifully designed. And this one, even though it does actually have 2 rows of boxes over on the side, also has on it a very visual main page, where if you're looking, you see that food over there on the left. And even though that's a veggie burger, that's looking pretty good to me, right? That makes me want to learn how to, to work with these recipes and investigate the app further, because the photography in it is really very beautiful. Which is one thing that you can really do to make your apps shine. How many of you do photography? And consider like semi-professional, it's more than just your phone, right? Although the 920 has really good photos, so that's a plug for the 920. Being able to have original content in your apps, original photos, original text, anything that's really beautiful or very compelling is another way to differentiate your app from other ones. Because other people aren't taking your photos, and other people aren't creating the content that you're creating. Having those in there is really going to provide a lot of value. All right, let's get back over. And I will show some code on how to do this here shortly. Okay. Looking great on high DPI displays. This is something that I think is really important. It's very easy for you to skip doing this, but it's something that when users are using these higher DPI displays, they're going to see fuzzy icons and fuzzy graphics. It's going to look terrible for them. The higher DPI displays, especially even something as simple as on the Surface Pro, you want to have the crispest images possible. Now, other platforms have had the same problem where they've gone from a phone to tablets and other stuff, and each time the DPI has increased or the resolution has increased, and they've had to account for that. And I'm really impressed with what the team put together here to make it really easy for you to incorporate high DPI images in your own apps. So let me pull this over. Let's see. All right, there we go. Inside this particular project, this is a project that's done as part of my book. It's just a photo browsing app, right? Inside this particular project, I have a number of different design assets. And I'm using them for things like the splash screen. I'm using them also for stuff like the app tiles and icons and whatnot. And each of those assets is named specifically over here. So if I look under this assets folder, I have badge logo.scale-100.png.scale-140, scale-180. Right. What that does is when I refer in either markup or code to badge logo.png, it will automatically pull in the correct DPI version for me based upon the DPI that user is using at that point in time. And I think that's absolutely great. I mean, it's a brilliant approach to doing this. Yes? So the question was, what if you're dynamically downloading images from a service, then it's not going to do this for you? Have you tried it and that failed? Okay. So actually what I would suggest is, because I haven't run into that particular one myself because I haven't tried that, but if you send me an email at pete.brown@microsoft.com, I work very closely with the teams that work on this stuff, so I'll ask them what their approach is for that and if there is another way to do it. Because, yeah, it's the file opening APIs and stuff there that work with that. There might be a way to write the stuff and then pull it up that way or something weird. Okay? There was another question right behind. Yes?
Is that the standard naming convention that you should follow between what results?
So the question is that the standard naming convention we should follow that the framework and everything supports? And the answer is yes. If you are providing multiple DPI images, like multiple images, you can do this. You can also put them in separate folders, and this is all documented on MSDN. I tend to put them all together and just use the .scale-100 and scale-140, et cetera, on there. And again, except for the downloading part that this gentleman asked about, that's going to work for anything which is local. It's going to work for all your badge images and everything else. There was, yes? Right, right.
So that if you know it's going into this section, specify that.
Yeah, so that you were saying that when you're going to Bing or something and pulling up images, you can specify the resolution. I'm not sure that's still going to work in this case because there's a question about the actual number of pixels and whether or not that's allowed there. All right, so let me pull this down for a second and show you where this is used in the app. So if I go into my AppX manifest and I look at this, this is where I've got those specified. So I didn't specify the scale 80 for which is when you kind of pinch out on that. But here I have 3 different images that are being used for the 270, the 210, and the 150. And I put a little number on those so that when you're using this as part of the sample in the book that you're able to differentiate which one is actually showing up at that point in time. But also importantly, I wanted to make sure that you realize here that this is not a case of simply starting with a single image and then scaling it down each time. Even though it may look like that, that's not exactly what's happening here. Where, so that's a small logo. Let me show you this. And it's a little hard to see there. But what I'm doing is I actually re-render the image each time because certain things like line thickness and other stuff, if you keep just scaling the image down, you start with the highest DPI one and keep scaling down, some of that detail gets lost. So you want to really create new images for each one of those in whatever kind of graphics tool that you're working on. And there are some public, like open source projects that'll help you with this, where you can snag an image and it will do the basic resizing of stuff for you. But again, if you really want to do a high quality job, then you really want to re-render those images for each of the different DPIs. And if you're working with a designer and you tell them that, hey, I need these at 140 dots per inch, 180 dots per inch or whatever, and you tell them the exact pixel size, they'll be able to do that for you because that's the type of thing that they are used to working with. And again, in your markup or in your code, if you want to reference this, so all I would have to do if I went to, let's say, mainpage.xaml here, and I wanted to, have an image on this, I can just say, image source equals, and I would say, in this case, appx : let's see, I have a badge logo.png, and of course you need your wax and stuff in there, right? But that's how you refer to it, refer to that particular image. You don't put the -scale, -whatever in that reference that image. You just refer to the image without that naming convention. Okay? Again, we take care of all the hard part for you, and it works. I think you've come up with the one scenario I hadn't considered where I haven't seen that working yet, but it does work on all the other file APIs. It does work when you're opening files through code as well as when you're opening files through markup. All right, so another thing I want to talk to you about and show you a bit of code how to implement this is really embracing the platform. So I work with a lot of companies that have apps on other platforms, on Android, on iOS, and one of the things that they do is they try to port the UI directly over, and it never really kind of works right. I mean, you have to rethink some of the UI and also some of the interactions. Like there are some apps that'll have buttons directly on the app that say share to Facebook, share to Twitter, share to whatever, and we would rather you use the share charm. And the reason for that is because you don't have to provide all those different endpoints in your app. Like, does anybody here know what the next big social network is going to be after Facebook finally jumps the shark? No, nobody does. I don't. I'd be quite rich, I'm sure, if I did. All right? None of us know that. So instead, what we have is an open-ended share charm here where any app can provide the interface to that next big thing, and instantly any other app which uses share can access that. And I think that's a really great approach for this. So I do a lot of stuff with like SoundCloud and recording and putting things up on there. Being able to have an app that I can share to from SoundCloud, being able to have an app that I can then share the same type of stuff to Twitter or share the same stuff to Facebook, or share it to my SkyDrive account or any of these, that's really a great way to use that, and it really helps light up on the platform. Another big thing is this trial mode versus creating separate apps that have trial and full versions. So did anybody here come to my Windows Store talk yesterday? So a few folks in here. I talked in there a bit about the trial mode and how we support that, and how you can go in and very simply in the Windows Store simply select an option from a drop-down that allows you to set a trial period for your app, but also how you can increase the capabilities of the trial period by adding some code to enhance that. Our platform is fairly unique in that you can do all of that inside a single app. You can make it so that you can download a free version of an app. You can have them easily use an in-app purchase to upgrade to the full version, or an in-app purchase to remove ads on there, or you can have just a very simple trial version, or a very simple app with a trial mode, and when it expires, they're prompted to go and buy the full version of it. All of that is built in. And the reason it's built in is because if the user doesn't have to make another decision that requires them to go to the store and download something else, the chances of you getting them to convert, to get them to buy that full version, are much higher than if they had to go and download a separate version. Similarly, if you go and put an app out in the store that costs $1.49 or $4.99 or whatever is appropriate for your particular app, and you don't have a trial version, most users are not going to bother downloading that app. You really need to have a trial version of some sort if your app has a price associated with it, unless you are one of those brands that everybody just immediately recognizes and knows is going to provide super high value. For all the rest of us, you really need to have that trial version of the app in the store. Another one is search. So especially we've released some blog posts lately that are talking about the newer search experience in Windows 8.1. I would encourage you to take a look at that because we've really enhanced what you can do with search there. But search is something that if your app has data, and pretty much every app has data of some sort, you can make it available to the operating system so that when users are searching for different stuff, your app can be one of the places that they search in. And the reason why that's important is because it provides another entry point into your app, another way that your app is useful on the platform and makes the platform better for being part of it. And as an app developer, you want to increase the number of times that a user goes in and tries to do stuff in your app. Because the more they see it as essential, the more likely they will to use it, and the more likely that your app is going to do really well in the store. Another one is roaming settings. So roaming settings is something that we've always had in even desktop apps, but a lot of people didn't even realize it was there. But we've built it in on Windows 8 to make it really easy for app developers to have these roaming settings in their app and have them automatically synchronized across different machines. And so that's great. Think about which types of settings you might want there. Some might be more machine specific, so you just put them in the local settings. But there are plenty of times when, if I'm playing a particular game, I might want my level progress in the roaming settings so that if I'm playing it on Surface, I can still go back to my desktop and also play it and pick up right where I left off. You can also do more. There are several really great games that use Azure to do that. And so they're really supporting full fidelity, moving from Windows Phone to Windows Desktop to a tablet and being able to continue your game across all of those. We looked at the couple of different main pages before. It's very common for developers who are coming from other platforms to not put a hub page in their app or a main page in their app. But consider that when you're building Windows 8 apps, you really want to start out, in almost all cases, with that hub. And that hub is really the first thing the user is going to see in your app. It should load very quickly, and it's going to give them the entry point into the rest of the app, and it's going to provide immediate value there. And I'll show you examples of all these in a second here. The nav bar and the app bar, most people know that there's an app bar, but a lot of folks don't realize that that top app bar is really meant for navigation. So that when you're if you've used Internet Explorer, for example, you can see all your different tabs show up in the top app bar, right, in that nav bar. And then all your commands and the address information and stuff show up in the bottom. A similar pattern is that you should follow in your apps is to have all the navigation at the top for the different sections of your app, right? And then again, have the commands at the bottom with the contextual stuff over on the left and then the global stuff over on the right. So embracing that as the main navigation pattern for your app is a really good idea as well. So let's look at these. I showed you some examples of hub stuff earlier, but let me just go through and 8. There you go. I'm going to create a new project here for a second. How many of you have never created a Windows 8 app at all? Like not even file new project? So a couple. Okay. So I've got regular Visual Studio here. And if I say file new project, I'm going to create a new grid app, which is one of the default templates in here. And I'm going to do Visual C#. Be good. And this is going to come up with a real basic layout for something that you can look at for how you might structure an app. Now, the reason this grid template is good is because it immediately gets you something that you can look at and experiment with and see what the interactions are like. But I've never used this template as the basis of an actual project. It's really there to give you some idea of how to do different things like working with the grid views and working with list views and stuff. But in almost all cases, your app is going to be better served by creating something from scratch and then adding individual pages to that. All right? So if I run this right now, you'll see what it looks like. All right, so here we have a couple rows of boxes, as we talked about before. If I want to go into a particular group here, I can see the information in group. I can also see individual items. It's very disappointing that we didn't use Bacon Ipsum here, but we used regular lorem ipsum. All right. Now, if I go back over, I talked about some of these different contracts. Now, a lot of folks don't realize that, let me get rid of this zoom on this. A lot of folks don't realize here that we have templates for each of these different contracts to make it really easy to add them to your app. So if I go into app.xaml and I look at the code in there, you're going to see that I have, let me scroll down here, on launched, on suspending. I don't have anything in here that handles, say, like search activation, right? So when you're building an app that uses search, it actually, when the user goes and picks your app from the list of things that they want to search from, it's going to come in through app.xaml, and you're going to get this on-search activated, on-search activating event. So if I want to add here a new item to be able to add search, I could do this all from scratch, or I can go through and look at the items here, and let's see, I see a share target interface. Where is search is one of these here, so hold on. Share, app, menus, text. I know search is one of these. Share. Oh, there it is. I was blind. So here's the search contract. The search contract in here is going to add a page that gives you an idea of like what the search content should look like, but then it's also going to add that code to your app.xaml. See, it went through, and here's my app.xaml, and it added onto the bottom here a bunch of stuff, but one of them, oops, there it is. I'll say that's not app.xaml. It added this on-search activated override. And so that's handling all the stuff for you that you would normally have to do for search. So even if you don't use these projects as the template for creating a new project, just being able to grab this code out of here and then pull it into your app is really great. Because now, if I want to search in this app, or if I want to search for from another app, I've got this kind of infrastructure built for me. So if I search right here, and I just type foo, I'm not going to see any results yet because I don't have any data like wired up to this, but I've got a page that handles this. And if I did have results, I would have that infrastructure built for me. That is a huge time saver, and it makes it really simple for you to add search into your app. At this point, what you end up doing is customizing look and feel, but all the basics of search are already handled for you. All right, so there's similar things like with share. So if I close this and share the contract, not share the singer. Let me add. I told you I'd be here all day. All right. Let's see. Add new item, not existing item. Let's try one more time. Add new item. I'm not a keyboard jockey, so you can watch me wrestle with the mouse the whole time I'm up here. So I have the search contract, but there's also the share contract. So if there's share target in this case. There's two types of share. So there's the ability for your app to share to other apps, which is really quite simple. You don't really have to do much to do that, and there's code for that on MSDN. It doesn't require additional pages to be added or anything, so there isn't a template for that. But there is also the ability for you to be the share target. So let's say that your app is some sort of journaling app inside the organization, right, where people need to be able to put stuff in to be able to have it journaled for compliance or any other reasons. You could actually make your app a share target where people could just share to that app and it could automatically write to different places, right? Or if you have an internal social network or an internal place where people can post, you could also make your app a share target there. And again, very simple to implement this. I just say add share target contract. And then I'm not going to demo this particular piece, but it goes through and it adds the pages that are required to support this. So share target page 1, you'll see here. If I go into the design, it adds this flyout for me, right? That shows you the real basic functionality. In this case, it has a button on it, but it's not really going to do anything for you here. But it shows you how, if your app was invoked from another app as a share target, it would invoke this particular piece and run this code. So again, all those really hard parts, because working with contracts can be somewhat complicated, all those really hard parts have been added as templates in Visual Studio to make it really simple for you to add those to your app. So I already mentioned why you might want to do something like share. Oh, actually, I want to do the app bar here for a second. Let me do this. since we're running short on time, let me show you some of the app bar stuff very quickly. In the same app here, if I go over to, say, this grouped items page, this is the main page in the app. And if you wanted to add an app bar, you just go to the top here and you say page.top app bar. Here's an app bar. And then inside the app bar, you can basically put whatever you want. So you can say text block, text equals foo. Oops, with extra quotes, always good. All right, and so your app bar is really free. I mean, you can do this. Usually you'll have buttons and other stuff in there. But if I run this right now, oh, text block, thank you. There we go, start this again. All right, so there's a tiny little, up in the corner there's a tiny little foo. It's world's smallest type ever, I think, up there, right? So let's go back to this and add something more meaningful. If you saw there was a bunch of hub data on the page and there was a bunch of groups for that, well, one of the navigation patterns is to take that top app bar and make it so that each place where you have a navigation section inside your hub, that's reflected in the top app bar so that people can get to that either via the hub or where they're in any other page in the app, they can get to it through the app bar. Right, so I have, doing all kind of Betty Crocker here, I just whipped together this. Pay no attention to the souffle already in the stove, right? What I've done in this is I've bound to the same collection that the grid view is bound to, and I've simply just pulled the list of items off there. So if I run this again, you'll see now that I have these items up here. And then clicking on one of them, just through the magic of using the same event handler, clicking on one of them will bring me over to the other page here. So again, you can do a really simple, really simple change there, really simple addition to your app to enable that navigation. And most likely what will happen in your apps, if you're not going to follow the same kind of data model that they use here, you're probably going to have MVVM and have it bound directly to a view model, and you're going to have some sort of top-level navigation and make that available from each and every page inside your app. But again, it's pretty easy to implement. It's not really complex. And then when you have the back buttons and everything in there, by just calling these navigation functions, they automatically get added to the back stack, and you don't have to do anything special to make that happen. All right. So let's wrap this up here. I already talked a little bit about share. So again, if you have data to share, make sure that you share that out there. Don't be an island, because the more places that a user interacts with your app, the more useful it's going to be, the higher quality that we're going to consider it. And also implement share target if you can do something with that. And we already did search and share, so let's move along. Testing. These are small apps, right? So they don't need to be tested. Yeah, okay. Here's the problem. If you don't test these apps, your users will test them. And they have ratings. You're getting how many of you have ever had your app rated in the past? And users are brutal with ratings. So if you have any bugs, people are going to be like, 1 star, waste of my $1.49 and all this kind of stuff in the comments, right? And so you want to make sure that your app does pretty well and is tested really well, because if you get those 1-star reviews, they are really hard to shake. We don't purge 1-star reviews for you. I mean, those are legitimate reviews. And many apps actually fail certification because they haven't been tested on the different versions of Windows. Also check performance. So we won't have time to go through this today, but I do have a talk I did a talk in TechEd India, and there's also a talk from Build 2012 last year, which covered a bit about performance and how to do things like enabling the frame rate counter. And I think, I won't have time to do that, but let me talk about some of the specifics. So some of the things that you need to do when you're trying to make a high-performance app is to reduce the number of times that you draw the same pixel. Right? So think about all the different layers that you have on your screen. If you're drawing that same pixel more than like 4 times, meaning you have a background, and on that there's a shape which has a color, and on that there's a small highlight shape, and then there's some text, that's drawing the same pixel 4 times at that point. If you're doing that more than 4 times, you're going to see stuff on RT devices, the panning performance is going to start to suffer a bit, or that any of the really fluid animation is not going to be as fluid as it could have been. And this is very true for any of you who've ever done WPF development. This is the same kind of takeaway there, where you're going to run into the same issues where the number of layers directly impacts the UI performance of the app, and especially when it comes to scrolling and moving around. So keep those things very simple, very flat, and do simple stuff like rather than overlaying something on top of something else, separate them. So this is on the the bottom cell and this is on the top cell, and you end up with roughly the same effect, but with a better performance profile. Also, you want to make sure that you reduce the amount of code in the UI threads. Right? So XAML apps should have as little code as possible in the UI threads. All right, I've got 1 minute left, and I'm going to show you a very quickly a way for you to see this overdraw performance. So if I go to app.xaml.cs here, and I go into my onLaunched, if I go to debug settings, there's a frame rate counter, so enable frame rate counter. This one equals true, right? And then I have debug settings is overdraw heat map enabled, true. Those two things, the overdraw heat map and the frame rate counter, are going to give you a really good idea of where you're going to hit performance issues inside your app. So you see the UI changed here because of the heat map, and the darker the color, the more times that pixel is being drawn. Okay, and so this is going to give you an idea. When you start seeing like really red, it's very pink here on the screen, but if you start seeing stuff that's really red, that means that it's drawing that pixel over and over and over again. And then up in the top left, we have the frame rate counters, and the frame rate counters are telling you, whether or not the compositor or the UI thread are able to keep up the required frame rates. And we have documentation for all this stuff on MSDN. Yep, sounds like my alarm clock. And there's no snooze button on this thing. I'm very disappointed. All right. Good. Support all the architectures, so make sure that you support 64-bit, x86, and ARM. We're not going to promote stuff that doesn't support all three, especially on TV. And then, of course, at 12:30, I'm going to be down outside the bookstore. If you have other questions, want to come by and talk, if you want to support my habits and buy my book on Windows 8 app development, you're welcome to do so. Or if you just want to talk about this or ask additional questions, I'll be around here and then in the bookstore afterwards. So please, if you like the session, please evaluate it. If you didn't like the session, then please go and grab a coffee or do something like that. Thank you very much.